so happy to be with you this morning. The last time I was here up front was in 2020, and it was a really special time. We talked about coconut trees and lessons from the coconut tree. Does anybody remember that? Tina does. A couple people do. Wow, what a blessing. I hope as you see the coconut trees, you still remember these good things that God is teaching us here on the island. Today, I want to talk about loving my neighbor. I'm going to share some stories of Jesus, and I'm going to share a personal story about loving my neighbor. You may have heard this story before. Behold, a lawyer stood up to put Jesus to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to them, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "You shall love." And when he said love, he didn't actually say love. He said agape, the Lord your God. Agape is a bigger kind of love than I like ice cream, or I like my mommy. I love my mommy, or I love my husband. It's even bigger than that. It is self-sacrificing love that does not stop. So you shall self-sacrificially love your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, "You answered correctly. Do this and you will live." I like this story. The words keep ringing in my head over the years. Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. So I want you to think about who is your neighbor as I go through my talk this morning. And at the end, I'd be really curious afterwards to hear what you have to say. Jesus gave another example of what a neighbor is. A man was walking from Jerusalem to Jericho. And in Bible times, that was about 15 miles, and it took about 8 hours to walk that far. It wasn't a straight, nice highway. It was a curvy road that went over a steep mountain pass with a large elevation increase. Jesus walked this route many times. He would walk this way when he went to Jericho himself. He would walk this way if he was going to Samaria. So you know when he's telling this story what he's talking about. It's the story of some robbers who attacked this Jewish man who was going to Jericho, probably to see family or for some business, just doing his ordinary life. And those robbers beat him up and stole his money and left him there to die. So the man is laying there by the road, and 3 different people walk by. The first man was a priest. That's a pastor, a religious leader of the church, and you would think he would be a helpful, loving man, right? But no, he was selfish. He was thinking about himself, and he was probably also afraid, because the Jewish law said that if you touched a corpse, that's a person who's died, then you would be ritually impure. And he didn't want to go through the whole process of becoming pure again, so he walked on for his own safety. Next came along a Levite. So he is a Jew. Levi is one of the tribes of Israel. He's a Jewish man, probably a respected man, in a good position in the community. So you would think that he would help his fellow countrymen, wouldn't he? But no, he was thinking about himself. He was pretty selfish, and he wondered maybe, what if the robbers are still here and are waiting for somebody else to come along because they need more money for drugs or something? And so he was scared to death and took off going down the road as fast as he could. The third man was not a Jew. In fact, his group of people, his people group, were hated by the Jews. They were essentially enemies, even though they had a similar background back in the old days. Samaritans were not part of the Jewish culture. They essentially lived next door to each other, but they were enemies. And this Samaritan man was not thinking about himself. He saw a wounded man by the road, and he's like, this man's in trouble. Wow, he might die if he doesn't get help. I wonder where his family is. Are they okay? He needs to have help. So he picked him up unselfishly, put him on his animal. Maybe it was a donkey. The photo has a horse. The Bible doesn't say. And he walked him the rest of the way to Jericho and got a hotel for him, and even left extra money there in case he had extra expenses that came up, maybe more medical needs or a way to communicate with his family. Wow, that's really incredible. So which of the three was a neighbor to the wounded man? I'm expecting you to be my class, but I'll let you sit there quietly. I'll tell you the answer. Obviously, it was the Samaritan, right? He crossed racial boundaries, political boundaries, religious boundaries, and he helped a man in need. So Jesus turned to the expert in law that he was telling this story to and said, which one was the neighbor? And the expert of the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus said, go and do likewise. That kind of unselfish love is agape love, where you're not thinking about yourself, you're thinking of the other person more than yourself. And it's the kind of love that Jesus has for us. This kind of love that he gives to us, he asks us to give to other people. It's the kind of love Jesus was talking about when he said the greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus gives us examples of this kind of love to poor people, sick people, lepers, hungry people, foreigners, near people, far people, dirty people, disliked people, dead people, demon-possessed people, rejected people, educated people, uneducated people, women, men, children. Jesus didn't seem to have any boundaries to those he would help. There was no cultural boundary, religious boundary, or political boundary in his mind. He loved people from all religions and from all cultures. This is a quote from Christ Object Lessons. I hope it's big enough to read. It's chapter 27, which is a lovely chapter if you get a chance to read it. And it talks about the Samaritan. The Samaritan represented Christ. Wow, Jesus is putting this like a parable into the story. Our Savior manifested for us a love that man can never equal. When we were bruised and dying, he had pity on us. He did not pass by on the other side and leave us helpless and hopeless to perish. He did not remain in his holy, happy home. He beheld our sore need. He undertook our case and identified his interests with those of humanity. He died to save his enemies. He prayed for his murderers. Pointing to his own example, he says to his followers, "These things I have commanded you, that you would love one another, as I have loved you, that you would love one another." Continuing in the same chapter, the glory of heaven is in lifting up the fallen and comforting the distressed. And wherever Christ abides in human hearts, he will be revealed in the same way. Wherever it acts, the religion of Christ will bless. Wherever it works, there is brightness. No distinction on account of nationality, race, or caste is recognized by God. He is the maker of all mankind. All men are of one family by creation, and all are one through redemption. Christ came to demolish every wall of partition, to throw open every compartment to the temple, and every soul that may have free access to God. His love is so broad, so deep, so full, that it penetrates everywhere. It lifts out of Satan's circle the poor souls who have been deluded by his deceptions. It places them within reach of the throne of God, the throne encircled by the rainbow of promise. Jesus went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. Acts 10. I just love this about Jesus. God was with Jesus, and Jesus went about doing good everywhere he went. He did good to those oppressed by Satan. And isn't that all of us? All of us seem to be under attack more and more. Greater temptations, greater struggles, trials in our families, financial troubles. All of us are oppressed by Satan in this world, and yet Jesus is here to save us. So, who do you think Jesus would spend time with if he lived on Guam? How do you think he'd spend his time from day to day? Would you only find him right here in the church? I think he might come on Sabbath morning, but I don't think that's where he would stay. What streets would Jesus walk down? What would he do when he was on those streets? What would doing good look like here on our island? Do you think Jesus would spend much time thinking about his safety? Or did he spend more time thinking about what would happen to these people if he didn't help them? In 1988, God called me to go do good on the island of Ponape. I taught third grade for a group of 18 wonderful students, and that was the beginning of God changing my heart and teaching me something about loving people. It was the year I first learned how to pray for other people, as I found that God really changed things in my classroom when I prayed for students by name. That was the first time I got to come to Guam also. In 1991, after I finished college, I followed God's calling to Thailand and taught English and served in the English-speaking church at Ekamai. That's the very church I worked in. Through this experience, I learned how much I needed the Holy Spirit to do anything good. On my own, I'm completely selfish, and I would have gone home early. But God gave me a little flash in my mind of what would have happened to the young people of the church if I left early. Because I stayed, a large number of them were baptized, and a large number of those still love God and are serving God with their whole heart around Bangkok, Thailand, and the world. It started when I took a volunteer position in my own town, teaching English to people who lived in our town in Washington State, but didn't know how to speak English. We had students from Mexico, Central and South American countries, Ukraine, Russia, and Somalia. It was the Somalian women who caught my attention the most. They were refugees. They had grown up in poverty and had not been able to go to school very much, if at all. They had learned a little English in the refugee camps, but not enough to get by in an American town. They were also Muslim. They wore head coverings and looked different from everyone else nearby, but as I got to know them, I came to really like them. Sadly, they had to move on to a bigger city for better work. There are some countries that are difficult for Americans to go to because of war, politics, or religious disagreements. Afghanistan has been a country where there's been fighting for a long time. The only Americans who went there were military, aid workers, or people who worked at the embassy. It was really dangerous. A lot of people died. We can't be missionaries there in person. But something happened in 2021 that changed things. It looked really bad, but God was using it for good. The Taliban took over the whole country. The Taliban is a strong political and religious group known for enforcing strict Islamic laws and also supports terrorism. The Americans and Canadians together were called the Coalition Forces and had been trying to protect the people of Afghanistan from the Taliban, but they were forced to leave in 2021. Many of the men in the country had been helping the coalition forces, and at that time, any man who had done that was in great danger from the Taliban because now there was a death sentence on their head. The Taliban wanted to kill them. So the Americans and Canadians helped many families escape Afghanistan. They had to pack a suitcase and leave quickly under great danger. These people became refugees and had to go live in a new country. Many came to America and started a new life. This opened a new opportunity to reach out to these people as our new neighbors. One such family came to my town. Zebi, the father of the family, could speak English quite well. He had been a translator for the coalition forces. There are 4 children in the family, and they started learning English in a refugee camp before they came to my town, and that's the actual children in that photo. Halima is the mother there in the orange outfit, and she couldn't speak English at all. In fact, she couldn't read or write in her own language because the Taliban had forbid going to school when it was time for her to start going to school. Girls weren't allowed to do that. Right now, girls can go to school up to 6th grade, but when she was in 1st grade, she wasn't allowed to go to school. So back when I worked in Thailand, I had a boss named Pat, and Pat lived in my town now. She was over 80 years old, and she had been asked to teach English to Halima. Pat quickly figured out that once or twice a week was not enough time for Halima to learn English because they weren't speaking English in the home. And so she called me to come and teach a couple times a week also, and so Halima was getting English 4 times a week. It was really hard for her. It was really slow. Halima, though, was very hospitable and would invite us over for yummy meals of Afghani rice and flatbread. And she enjoyed cooking, so I would teach English using American recipes, and we made cake together and other things. It was really challenging because she had never learned to learn. But slowly she became more confident and began to remember what she was learning. This involved other people. We involved other people. When Pat and I couldn't teach for various reasons, we would have other people come and take our place. So Halima made more friends. The more friends she made, it seemed to really increase her ability to speak. At some point, she started calling me sister when I would come to her house, and she would greet me with a hug. "Hello, sister. How are you?" I knew then I was becoming family. She told me that when I was not there, she was sad. But when I came, she was happy. Wow. It wasn't just an English class now. Afghan women are used to be surrounded by other women who clean and cook together and raise their children together. Multi-generational families lived together. So she and her husband had lived in a family home in Kabul with his mother, a couple brothers, and their families. Each family had their own room, and there was a central area for cooking, eating, and entertaining. I was learning more about Islam all the time from some trusted people who love God. When you greet someone, always ask how their family is doing, how their mother is, how their father is, and they will always ask you about yours. I learned that there were two kinds of prayer in Islam. One is a ritual prayer that happens 5 times a day where a person bends and prostrates themselves to the floor and says the same thing over again. The other kind of prayer is called making dua. It means making supplication or request to God. It isn't commonly done, but everybody knows about it. When Halima told me that her mother in Afghanistan was having heart problems, I decided to start making dua to God for her mother right there. So to make dua, you put your hands together in a little cup shape, like you're ready to catch all the blessings that God has for you. They don't close their eyes, but I can't help it. I have to close my eyes when I pray. And at the end, you take this cup of blessings that God has poured out, and you put it on your face with gratitude. So eventually, when I prayed with Halima, I asked her if she would like to make dua too in her own language, Pashto, and she did, and it made her very happy. Halima's mother, father, 3 brothers, and their wives and children lived together in a small village an hour outside of a larger city in Afghanistan. There are 20 people living together in kind of a housing compound. Each family has their own little room, and then there's a central courtyard and a cooking area, and I think there's also a men's room. There's no electricity in the house. There are cushions for sitting on the floor, as you can see in the lower corner, and they eat on the floor with their hands. There's always bread and usually some rice, some curry. Her family owns a little land, and they still harvest grain the way they did in the time of Abraham with sickles, and they carry it on their heads or their backs. They do have a donkey in the family, last I knew, and they use the donkey for plowing and anything they do to the land. They used to have goats and cattle and chickens, but they were already eaten, stolen, killed by sickness, or by the Taliban. One day this past January, I went to Halima's house, and like usual, I asked her how her mother was doing. She paused and then said in her beautifully advancing English skills, "My mother call. She say, no food, 3 days." What? No food? Yes, no food. Nothing at all? Nothing. So I asked more questions, including calling her husband so I could get a larger English explanation. And I found out that when the Taliban had taken over, they had also taken her brother's jobs away from them. And so they had been using up their savings, and there was nothing left. They were out of money with no hope. So make dua, make supplication to God. We prayed together for her mother, and I asked God to bless them and pour out a blessing so big they could not contain it, a cup running over. And I asked God, what am I supposed to do? Because, I don't want anybody starving on my watch. I dug around in my purse, found some money, gave it to her, and they sent it over using whatever Cash App method that they have to send to Afghanistan. And it was enough food. Zabi told me it was enough food to last maybe 3 weeks, maybe 4 if they were careful. And I'm like, okay, I have a little time. I went to my prayer friend, Marcy. She knew my student. She had taught her some too. She loved Afghans and Muslim people, and we prayed together, asking God what to do to help Halima's family. I could keep sending money, but it wouldn't solve the problem. There's a saying that says, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Halima's brothers needed a way to work and take care of their family by earning their own money, but how? Marcy and I prayed a lot, and this is what God impressed us to do. We needed to have a bake sale in front of our local grocery store in a couple weeks as a fundraiser. I started calling my friends and asking them to bake bread and desserts to sell at the sale. They told their friends, and soon I had a page full of names of people who would bake. The problem was, it was wintertime in Washington State. January is our coldest month. And it was a really, really cold week, the week before the sale. In fact, it got down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Then the forecast said it was going to freeze rain the day of the sale. As soon as that went up, I was getting phone calls from concerned people. I think we should cancel the sale. And by that time, I had no idea how to cancel a sale because I had told so many people and told them to tell their friends, and I was getting phone calls from people I didn't even know saying they were going to bake things. And the word was already in the bulletins of all the area churches. So I'm like, I can't cancel the sale. Instead, we prayed and asked God to take control of the weather. And he did. The morning of the sale, it wasn't freezing rain. It wasn't even snowing. In fact, it had warmed up to 24 degrees. We put on our snowsuits, our hats, our gloves, our thick layers, our boots. That's Marcy and I. And we brought tables over in front of the grocery store. We set them up with pretty tablecloths, and people were already there waiting for us before we arrived with their baked goods. The tables filled up, and we needed more. So a pastor brought us 2 more tables. Marcy and I started selling food items quickly. And I just want you to know the sidewalks are cleared, but behind my head you can probably see some piles of snow. This parking lot was covered with snow. It had been plowed, but there was snow everywhere. So it's really not a good day to go to the store, but people came by anyway. I want you to look at that picture of the bread. Those are sourdough loaves that my friend Mary Lynn made, and she had them sold before she even got them to the bake sale. I think they raised $200 or so. As I was collecting money, some people would give me, pick up $5 worth of something, and they'd give me a $10 bill. And they'd pick up $10 worth of something and give me a $20 bill, or a $50, or a $100 bill. One lady gave $300, and one lady made me cry when she gave $500 for the sake of hungry people in Afghanistan. A Mennonite lady brought 10 homemade pies and more sourdough bread. We had sweetbreads, banana bread, zucchini bread, gluten-free bread, vegan bread. There was cinnamon rolls. There was muffins of all kinds, cowboy cookies, ginger snap cookies, peanut butter cookies, chocolate chip cookies, raspberry bars, date bars, fudge, 5 kinds of fudge. It was incredible. At the end of the sale, we also brought Halima over for a little while. That's Halima with the head covering. And she helped us sell for a little while and saw what people were doing. At the end of the sale, I took Halima home and I gave her $300 as the first gift from the bake sale for her family. I didn't know the total number yet, but I knew it was a big, big number. Halima told me that her 2 older brothers had 1 pair of boots between them, and that they decided at the beginning of the day who was going to wear boots and who was going to go barefoot. Now all of her brothers could have boots. Now her mother could go to the good doctor and get better medicine and get better help. Now everyone would have food. I prayed a blessing on her family and thanked God for providing all the donations at the bake sale. And then I went home, warmed up, and started to count money with help from one of the bake sale ladies. I imagined in the beginning that God would provide, $500 or $1,000. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Well, I already knew it was more than that. Not in my wildest dreams did I think that there would be $5,000 worth of cash sitting on my dining room table after that sale. We counted again just to be sure, and it was $5,000 and some change. God provided above and beyond all of my expectations, and I praise and thank him and can see clearly this was his idea. It was his desire to provide this for Halima's family in Afghanistan. Halima's husband began talking to her brothers about what kind of business they could start. I hadn't told them yet how much money we had. I had just told them it was big and God had done a wonderful thing. I wanted to be careful so they didn't have trouble with the Taliban. At first, they thought they could buy some flour and oil and make some baked goods, and I said they could do that, but there was money for an even bigger business. It took much negotiation, and we prayed that God would give them the wisdom to make the right choice and would bless and protect them and their business. Halima and her brothers decided to buy a used rickshaw, and the second oldest brother is now a licensed taxi driver in the nearest big city. They also bought a cow and a calf, so they have regular milk for the family. They're making cheese and yogurt to sell, and they hope to grow their herd again so that they can raise cattle again like they used to in the past. We asked them a very special thing. We said there's only one requirement we have for the money, and that is that every time they earn money, they are to thank God, because the money isn't from us, the money is from God. And we ask them to give money to help other people in need, especially the widows who don't have a husband to take care of them. And they gladly said yes, because yes, this matches up with their religion. Their Islamic religion says the way you can be close to God is to give money and to take care of other people. Okay, but there's also one more special thing that happened. Halima's family didn't make dua before. They didn't ask specific requests of God for their needs. They only did these recited ritual prayers that didn't have personal meaning because they're even in Arabic, which isn't even their language. But now Halima's family are praying all the time and asking God to supply their needs and to help other people. She said they didn't used to be happy, but now they're praying and now they're happy. Now they're kind to each other. Now they say nice things to each other. She also told me that her mother and brothers are praying for Marcy and I and our families too. And I cannot believe, I feel so humbled to have precious people in Afghanistan, of all the places in the world, praying for me. Wow. At the time of the Muslim holiday Eid, I was able to go with Halima's family and her husband and children to the nearest mosque in the town about an hour away from ours. I went with them and I prayed with the women in the women's prayer room, and I met their friends, and now I'm hoping to make connections with their friends. I have also met relatives that live in California, and now those relatives are making dua too, praying to God and asking for help. Halima trusts me now, and more spiritual conversations have opened up about deeper things. Do you see how this works? When you love your neighbors from around the world who live next door, when you care for them, meet their needs, invest your time in their best good, something very special can happen. A ripple starts moving out and extends to their family and friends in places that we cannot go. The love of God is so attractive, so beautiful when it's seen in loving deeds. I believe God wants to do something special here on Guam, and he wants you to do it. You can start praying for a divine appointment that brings you together with someone different from you, but in need of the agape love that God gives us. Jesus told us to go into all the world and preach the wonderful good news of the gospel to all nations, tongues, and peoples. Essentially, he was saying, please start doing cross-cultural ministry. When we give our lives to God and his service, amazing things happen. Start with the people that God puts in your life here. Guam is full of people from all over the world. There are people from many countries of Asia, Africa, Europe, North and South America. There are tourists, military, businessmen, international students, and these people need friends. Some friendships will be brief, but some will be long-lasting. You will see God open doors as you work for him. When he calls you into a relationship, don't hold back. Don't hold back. Do it big. Do it 100% for God. So if you want more training in cross-cultural ministries, go to reachtheworldnextdoor.com. They have wonderful resources, videos and workbooks, and they also have another website called My Language, My Life, and it is a place you can take people who speak another language, look up their language, and there are things that they can listen to in their own language, their heart language that speaks to them the most. Yes, there's something in Chamorro, but sadly, I looked last night and there is nothing in Chuukese. There is nothing in Pohnpeian, Yapese, Palauan, or Marshallese. And I think something needs to change. Unfortunately, I don't speak those languages, but maybe the people who do, who live here, can get them sent to My Language, My Life, so that this will be a more effective website on Guam. I want to end with 3 quotes. I want you to listen to these as I read them to you. It talks about God's purposes for the strangers who come to our lands. While plans are being carried out to warn the inhabitants of various nations and distant lands, much must be done in behalf of the foreigners who have come to the shores of our own land. The souls in China are no more precious than the souls within the shadow of our doors. God's people are to labor faithfully in distant lands as his providence may open the way, and they are also to fulfill their duty towards the foreigners of various nationalities in the cities and villages and country districts close by. It is well that those in responsibility are now planning wisely to proclaim the third angel's message to the hundreds and thousands of foreigners in America. God desires his servants to do their full duty towards the unborn millions of the cities, and especially towards those who have come to these cities and our lands from nations of the earth. Many of these foreigners are here in the providence of God, that they may have the opportunity to hear the truth for this time. Great benefits would come to the cause of God if in the regions beyond, if faithful effort were put forth in behalf of the foreigners in the cities in our homelands. Among these men and women are some who, upon accepting the truth, could soon be fitted to labor for their own people in this country and in other countries. Many might return to the places from which they came in the hope of winning their friends to the truth. They could search out their kinfolk and neighbors, even communicate to them a knowledge of the third angel's message. I don't know the end of Zabi and Halima's story, but God does. The beginning, though, is so amazing, I can hardly contain it. Surely God has further plans, bigger plans. God is doing amazing things among Muslim people. Maybe he wants to use you to reach someone else. May God guide, empower, and bless you as you reach out to the people here on Guam.